Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Got Harem with Hinata and Mei Terumi Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Naruto of the Hidden Mist. The flak jacket fit snug to Naruto's body as he zipped up the front. Its charcoal gray color contrasted with his unruly blonde hair that was only kept in check thanks to his loosely fitted hitai. The 4 kiri waves were proudly engraved into the metal. He quickly tightened the dark cloth that wrapped around his head and checked himself in the mirror on the opposite wall of his bedroom. The pinstriped arm guards were always a little too tight. He would have to ask his mother if she could adjust them for him. Naruto flexed his fingers a few times before he settled with the small discomfort. The glint of his kunai holster on the bed made him turn to grab it. Naruto. A loud voice boomed into his room through the door, followed by a few powerful smacks to the wood. We're waiting on ya, no. Ka-san, could you be a little quieter? Naruto grimaced as he entertained the thought of his door being knocked down simply with the strength of her voice. Uzumaki rarely had much patience to begin with, but his mother was on another level. She would always get on him and his father about taking too long to do something, when really they were going at a normal pace. Naruto thought about it for a moment and could not stop the smile from forming on his lips. That was his mother though, and he still loved her for it. In the end, she only had the family's best interests in mind. Besides, there was a reason why she wanted him to hurry, and that was because he had a very special appointment at the hospital today. Recently, his mother had been scheduling him regular appointments to meet with Fuso Oba-chan to test his tenketsu and chakra pathways. Apparently, he was starting to near the age where a part of his grandmother's Kekkei Genkei would unlock. He finished fastening the kunai holder to his leg and similarly latched his equipment pouch onto his waist. With the last of his uniform squared away, Naruto rushed over to the door to avoid invoking his mother's wrath. Outside, his mother and father waited near the entrance to their apartment. Kushina was actually halfway down the hall to bang on his door again, whereas his father merely stood back looking as resolute as ever. Sorry, Ka-chan, I'm ready, Naruto said with a bashful smile. Kushina's aggravated demeanor shifted after hearing her son's apology. She was never one to stay mad for long when it came to such trivial matters. The distance between them closed as Kushina threw her arm over his shoulder and brought him embarrassingly close. A smile from her meant that all had been forgiven. Good boy, Naruto. Kushina patted him on the shoulder and pushed him along. Now, let's not keep Fuso-chan waiting all day. She led him out the door with Minato dutifully falling in behind them. As Naruto passed, Minato had given a reassuring wink and a small grin. His father was always more reserved than his mother, but he had his own way of showing affection. Luckily, he had a level head and plenty more patience than his mother to get angry over something like changing clothes. As the family of 3 exited their building, Naruto realized they looked like a squad about to head out on a mission. Kushina and Minato both wore their own uniforms, though that was not so odd concerning his father since he was often home between missions. Kushina on the other hand rarely left the village and had gotten used to wearing more casual clothes around. Minato always expected Naruto to keep an air of professionalism when he was going around the village, so his mother must have been trying to appease him since he was home after so long. Of course, being one of the noble clans meant the Uzumaki had a certain reputation around the village, but his her never much cared for such titles or traditions. His father really was the ideal shinobi, Naruto guessed. That just gave him another target to aim for. He would not let his parents' support be for nothing. For many weeks he had been praying that the doctor's appointment would confirm he would receive the Kekkei Genkei of his grandmother's clan, so that he could make Kushina and Minato proud. Naruto's face tightened as he concentrated on that vision of success. He would let nothing stop him from reaching it. Ah, look over there, Naruto. Karen-chan and the others returned, Naruto followed his mother's excited gaze down the street where a procession of shinobi were walking toward them. Naruto quickly recognized the red hair of his cousin, Karen Uzumaki. He also realized her eyes were locked on him as she ran out of the group toward his family. As she was the youngest member of the Cipher Intelligence Division, the girl wore a loose-fitting green kimono with a beige, pinstriped shirt. The Hittite of the village hung loosely from her neck. From this distance, he could already see her face reddening in his presence, something that happened far too often to be normal. His mother liked to tease him about Karen's feelings, but to him they were less of a laughing matter and more of a life and death situation. I've seen her hit Suigetsu halfway down the street when she gets angry. Definitely too dangerous. Karen-chan, welcome back. How was your mission? Kushina was all smiles as she greeted the girl, whose exhaustion had all but disappeared upon arriving at Naruto's side. Ah, Kushina-sama, I'm glad to be back. Karen's eyes shifted toward Naruto as her eyes nervously danced behind her rimmed glasses. I already feel better from all the running, Karen added, quietly. Naruto did his best to keep up a friendly demeanor as his mother did. He offered Karen a smile and nodded as she spoke some about her mission. She had left a few weeks ago with members from the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist to carry out a scouting mission in the Land of Frost. Naruto had never been to the mainland before, so he was interested in what she had to say, but he also wanted to check out the other shinobi that had been part of the group. He turned to see his father glaring at Zabuza Momochi as he passed. Their eyes met for a moment before the swordsman carried on along with the others. The look his father had offered them was unnerving to say the least. Naruto had never seen him so displeased before. In his own way, Naruto had always looked up to the seven swordsmen and envied their strength and reputation in the village. Of course, he could never say he had the bloodthirst to live up to their image, but it did not change the fact that they were still the most prestigious organization in all of Kiri. People looked up to them, either with respect or from fear. Naruto-kun. He heard his name and quickly returned to the conversation at hand. Karen and his mother had been staring at him with a certain amount of concern. Apparently his face had soured after seeing his father's silent exchange with Zabuza. Minato of course had covered his tracks rather well and was staring off into the sky, avoiding his mother's wanting gaze. Sorry about that. Naruto scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. Karen-chan, you said your mission was a success. So, no Kumo ninja have crossed the border. Karen hummed in approval, his warm regards made any suspicion fade away. Since the last battle a few weeks ago, there hasn't been any sign of raiding parties. Thank goodness, Kushina muttered with a solemn expression. The Uzumaki living there have gone through enough, I'd say. Quote, Karen and Naruto could only nod since they were only privy to rumors and hearsay. From what he had gathered, an enclave of non-shinobi Uzumaki in the Land of Frost had been attacked by Kumogakure shinobi. Considering the fact that the Land of Frost was a protectorate of the Land of Water, the village sent a small force to counterattack. Things got ugly when it was revealed the attack was actually a slave raid. Kumogakure had taken to kidnapping bloodline users or those with known clan affiliations as breeding stock. It was a sickening practice and every time he thought about it, Naruto could not help but feel his gut turn over. His father was one of those who were sent to rescue the civilians, but apparently so were the seven swordsmen. Since that mission, his father had become a little bit more distant. He could only guess that had something to do with the harsh stare he had offered the swordsmen as they passed by. There were rumors some of the Uzumaki were killed by Kiri shinobi in the middle of combat. There's no way Two-san would do that, so if the rumors are true, the swordsman must have. Naruto did not want to think more of it. Neither did his mother as she had quickly changed the topic to Naruto's visit to the hospital. Karen wished them luck and regretfully had to excuse herself. Her team was waiting for her down the road as they needed to meet the Mizukage and have an official debriefing. Since she had been brought into the Cipher Division, her freedom had been severely curtailed. He wondered if she was cut out for such strict work, but he knew from his mother how much of a talented shinobi she was in the eyes of the Uzumaki and the village. She may have scared the living hell out of him sometimes, but Naruto had nothing but respect for Karen's skills as a kunoichi. With any luck, he could develop his strength even more to surpass her talent. Kushina, Naruto, we'd best head out too. Minato urged them forward, though he was kind as always. You're right. Kushina gave Naruto a more than friendly shove forward, hiding her strength behind a sickeningly sweet grin. Come on, kiddo, destiny awaits. Naruto just shook his head and continued down the road with his family. As exhausting as they could be, Naruto really did cherish the times he got to spend with his parents. Naruto found himself sitting in a particularly uncomfortable chair waiting for the doctor to finish her report. Fuso was another Uzumaki with long, plum-red hair. She actually had a striking resemblance to his mother when she let her hair down, but that was to be expected considering the woman was loose enough to be referred to as an aunt. Kushina and Minato stood behind him, both eagerly awaiting the doctor to say something. So far she had only asked him the standard questions for a checkup, so he really doubted there was much to talk about. Still, Naruto could not help but feel their anxiousness rub off. Fuso got up from her chair and offered Naruto a gentle smile. When her hand began to glow green, he could not help but fidget uncomfortably. With a few quick taps, she checked his chakra pathways and tenketsu for any abnormalities. Apparently that was the only way they could tell he was nearing the awakening of his Kekkei Genkai. So, does he have, Ka-chan's? Kushina could barely hold herself together as she practically shouted the words, fists pumping up and down in excitement. Now Kushina, I know you're excited but you have to wait. His mother deflated with Fuso's calming words, but the tension remained. After checking a few more pressure points on his body, his aunt backed away and wrote more information down in his folder. He almost wanted to get up and read over her shoulder, though he figured it would be seen as rude to do so. He could wait a little longer than his mother, at least. Just as we confirmed in the last appointment, there is some unique activity happening in your chakra flow, Fuso then asked with a raised brow, have you noticed anything when molding chakra? Naruto just shook his head negatively. When he began to frown, his aunt only offered him a smile as she wrote that down. Don't worry, Naruto-kun. That's perfectly normal. In fact, if you did feel something off, then it could even be seen as a bad sign. He could hear his mother let out a sigh of relief behind him. So, Fuso Oba-san, what do you think? Do I have the Terumi Kekkei Genkai? Naruto had to put the question out there directly. His mother Kushina had always considered his inheritance of the ability a distant chance, as her mother had been a Terumi that married her Uzumaki father. Marriage between the two clans was a relatively common occurrence considering their past together, but exchange of Kekkei Genkai was considerably more rare. As unfortunate as it was that Kushina herself did not inherit the ability, she held out hope he would get the trait instead. Fuso smiled as she reached into her pocket and pulled a familiar piece of paper. Naruto recognized it as chakra paper, used by shinobi to test for their affinity to nature elements. Well, how about we find out right now? Here, Naruto-kun. She offered him the piece of paper and he readily accepted it, slipping it between his pointer finger and thumb. According to your records, the last time you took the test you received a straight water affinity. Correct. Naruto nodded as he remembered in the academy when his piece of paper dissolved between his fingers after a quick application of chakra. Try it out then. You should see a different result if the Kekkei Genkai really has been inherited. Spurred on by his aunt's encouragement, Naruto applied chakra to the piece of paper. When Naruto inserted chakra into the piece of paper, it began to crumble, then ignited with fire, and finally was put out with water and dissolved into pieces. Before he could even enjoy a moment of wonder after watching the mess of elements, he was smothered by his mother's chest in a bone-crushing hug. Fuso barely stifled her amusement by covering her mouth as Naruto struggled to escape his mother's clutches. She kept shouting out her congratulations to him and how proud she was, despite the fact they still did not know if the Kekkei Genkai was confirmed or not. Congratulations, Naruto, Minato whispered his congratulations with a small pat on Naruto's shoulder. When his father mumbled that sentence, it was all the confirmation he needed to know that his prayers had been answered. His father never made a misstep and had never spoken out of turn either. When he said something, Naruto took it for what it was as pure fact, and today was no exception. I really have it. Do ya know how amazing this is? I'm so happy. Kushina shook her son around a bit more as Naruto finally returned her hug. They shared a family moment that was soon broken with the door sliding open. Fuso turned to see who it was, only to bow in respect. Minato quickly did the same as he had noticed the door open first. Kushina and Naruto both turned to see the Yondaime Mizukage, Yagura, enter with a small smile on his face. Yondaime-sama. Welcome. Kushina bowed after her haphazard greeting with Naruto following her lead. He had no idea the Yondaime would take an interest with him, especially on a peaceful day like this. The last time they had met was when he completed his last mission a few days ago. They had never really talked much, but his father had always been respectful when he talked about the Mizukage and his incredible strength as the Jinchuriki of the Three Tails. His mother was also particularly respectful, considering her usual cheery attitude. He always figured it had something to do with the both of them being tailed beast jailers. Hello everyone. It's good to see you in such high spirits. Yagura spoke with a distinctly formal tone that sometimes felt out of place coming from a superior like him. However, it has also made him seem more approachable than most. Considering the darker reputation he had among the common folk, Naruto supposed his friendly demeanor was a good thing. It was hard to believe a boyish, short-stature man like the one in front of him was a monster of any kind. But, he knew very well that looks could be deceiving. Yondaime-sama, thank you for coming to check on our son's progress, Minato said, bowing deeper. Yagura went farther in the room to stand with the group. Finally, they were able to stop bowing and peer down at the leader of the village normally. Of course, Minato-san. I have actually come to speak with Naruto considering some business matters. If you would all give us some time alone. Though his tone was still polite, an order was an order. Yes, sir. Minato led the others out without a second thought. Kushina shot a concerned glance back toward Naruto, which he returned with a confident smile. Her love for him sometimes felt a bit like a drag, but he especially appreciated it in moments like this. All the same, he was not so much afraid of Yagura as he was of what the man had to say. Business matters could mean a lot of things with a cage. Naruto-kun, I hope you've been well. This good news has surely lifted your spirits. As soon as the door closed, Yagura opened with a compliment. Yes, Yagura-sama. Thank you for asking. Yagura waved his hand to dismiss the thanks as nothing. He really was overwhelmingly formal with his subordinates. I hope that in the future you will find that you also carry your mother's abilities as well. Each step you take seems to make you into a more and more promising shinobi. Quote. The compliment made Naruto blush a bit, but he could not help but feel the other man was merely being polite. As the Mizukage, it was his job to foster a strong village through powerful shinobi. It only made sense he wished for Naruto to gain more abilities for the sake of the village. Do you remember what we talked about, the time you were promoted to Chunin? Yagura clasped his hands behind his back, waiting patiently for an answer. Naruto thought back to the conversation they shared in the Mizukage's garden, atop the central office building the village leader did his work in. That was the first time he realized the Yondaime had actually acknowledged him as more than just another shinobi, or another Uzumaki. At first he had passed it off to his parents' accomplishments, but now he wondered if there was more to it than that. You said that if I displayed a certain level of progress, I might be considered for special training. That seemed to be the central point of the conversation as he remembered it, at least. Yes, that's right. I would consider the unlocking of the Terumi bloodline a considerable amount of progress, wouldn't you? Not waiting for an answer, Yugura continued to speak. The curves of his mouth started to turn upward in a knowing smile. It's about time I take you under my wing. Even after the academy, there was talk for you to be considered by the seven swordsmen as well as the Anbu, but I preached caution as I wanted to see just what you were capable of first. This progression has proven to me that you are ready to start exploring these possibilities. Naruto could not help but swallow hard after hearing all that information. He had no idea that he had been scouted for those organizations, nor was he aware of the Mizukage's involvement. Had his mother and father known? If they did, they were good liars. The thought of that kind acknowledgement both excited and frightened him. What kind of special training do you mean, Yugura-sama? That was the one part he still did not quite understand the purpose of. Of course, to receive any kind of lesson from the esteemed leader of the hidden village was more than an accomplishment, it was a godsend. But, he knew very little of Yugura's abilities outside of his fame as a Jinchuriki and Suiten user. To answer that, let me ask you a question, Naruto, Yugura responded with another smile, his gaze wandering to the window across the room. Do you know the history of your clan and how you came to join the village? Quote, of course, Mizukage-sama. Naruto answered immediately. It would be pretty insane to say he did not know the history of the Uzumaki, his own clan. When Uzushiogakure was abandoned in its time of need by the Senju during the First Shinobi War, the Terumi came to our aid from Kiri. The Shodai, Byakuran Terumi, made a pact of cooperation with my ancestor, Ashina Uzumaki. From that union, Udai Terumi and Mito Uzumaki were married and brought our clans into a relationship we still have today. Quote, it was all facts that he had either heard from his mother or read in the family scrolls. History had never been his strong suit, but it was all still interesting nonetheless. The world was so different back then. Yes, that much is true. And do you remember how Mito Uzumaki became the village's hero and made the Uzumaki as well known as they are today? From Yugura's tone, it was very clear he was leading the conversation to an obvious end. Unfortunately, Naruto still did not see the point. Nonetheless, he knew the answer to the question. That same answer resided inside of his mother. Mito Uzumaki, together with her husband, infiltrated the Land of Fire during an internal conflict between the Shodai Hokage and Madara Uchiha and Seal. The nine-tailed fox inside of herself. So, she became the first Jinchuriki and brought the fox back to our village, increasing our military strength. After that, the Uzumaki and Terumi formed the noble clans of Kirigakure that made the members above common scrutiny of the populace. Later with the Nadime's reign, the Hazuka were added to the noble clan lineup and formed what it remained as today. Eventually Kirigakure would either be given, or take for themselves, the three-tailed turtle and the six-tailed slug. Much of that was accomplished due to the presence of the Uzumaki and their powerful sealing techniques. The rest of the villages were too occupied to create their own sealing techniques and could do little to respond. Konoha to this day remained without a tailed beast, putting it in a relatively disadvantageous position in the distribution of power. Very good. That's all correct. Thanks to the Uzumaki, Kirigakure is well known as the most powerful village for two key reasons. We have three-tailed beasts and a considerable population of powerful bloodline users. Naruto always knew the village was relatively successful, but he knew little of how they were looked at by other villages. To know they were considered the most powerful gave him a bit of pride. Yugura noticed Naruto's expression and chuckled. It was indeed a good feeling, but there was a lot of work that went into maintaining that status quo. Anyway, to go back to your original question, your training will involve learning about the tailed beasts. Just like your mother, I am a Jinchuriki, and therefore I have a responsibility to the village to both contain this power and to use it against our enemies. Yugura's tone turned serious the more he spoke, and Naruto felt his legs turn to gel. What is our biggest strength can turn into our most formidable threat, so you must understand how important it is to have capable retainers that can subdue the beast should the need arise. Quote, the thought of being trained to become a Jinchuriki made the sweat turn to ice on his back. He had nothing but respect for the 3 Jinchuriki in the village, but he had never considered joining their ranks. Kushina was strong, but he could see her struggle with the stress both mentally and physically. Yugura realized Naruto's face was one of worry and tried to ease his concerns with a smile. Leave your concerns behind, Naruto, as I don't plan on making you a Jinchuriki if I can help it. You are one of many potential candidates, should the unthinkable happen and we need to contain a tailed beast. Somehow, that did not help calm Naruto's nerves. It mostly has to do with your blood. As a member of the Uzumaki clan, your sealing techniques would be very useful in such a situation. That much made sense, though it did not explain why he specifically had to be the one to take the job. When Naruto realized what he was saying, he wanted to slap himself. He was disrespecting his mother by being so hesitant about the situation. If anything, he should be proud to make such a sacrifice for the village. That is what his father would say, and that is what he should have been saying all along. Still, he could not help but tighten his fists at the thought of facing down a tailed beast. Anyway, all of that is hypothetical for now. Let's not dwell on it. For now, your priority is to nurture and grow your newly awakened Kekkei Genkai properly. To do that, you'll need a proper teacher. Naruto appreciated the change in topic back to something that was worth celebrating. What Yugura said was true, that he would need a teacher. The last time he served under a Jonin, it was over 4 years ago. Back when he was a genin and life was arguably much simpler. I'm confident we can find someone in the Terumi family to take on that role. In fact, I already have a few in mind off the top of my head, Yugura said with confidence. For now though, I'll let you enjoy the rest of the day with your family. The training can start at a later date, after I've had time to set up a few related matters. The delay was something Naruto was secretly relieved of. Yugura-sama, is all of this really because I unlocked my Kekkei Genkai? Naruto suddenly asked, as he realized just how overwhelming it was to all of a sudden be given that much attention. Yugura must have been waiting for that question as he smiled again. He made a quick expression toward the door, where Naruto's family waited. Some time ago, your parents came to me to ask for my help in giving you a fitting role to support the village. They believed the training and missions you were undergoing were mediocre and would not satisfy you. Quote, his parents said that about him. From his father he could have expected it, but his mother too. He had no idea they felt that way about his future, or at least that strongly. While your Kekkei Genkai is a welcome gift, the work you have put into your career to this point has finally bore these fruits of labor for you to take. Don't pass them up. Yugura's words resounded in Naruto's heart. I'll send for you tomorrow. There are some people I'd like you to meet, to better help you make an informed decision. Yugura gave Naruto a short bow and left the room. Naruto returned the gesture as the Mizukage left. Not a moment after the leader left, Kushina rushed back in and gathered him in her arms. She must have seen through his distant look as she quickly became concerned. Sorry, Naruto. We should have told you about our talk with the Yondaime sooner. Minato had been so concerned you weren't receiving the right amount of attention, Yano. His mother's excited tick came out again, but it just made her words all the more sincere. Of course, Ka-chan. I understand, thanks for doing what you did. Kushina buried her head into his neck and thanked him over and over again. Naruto's eyes wandered to the door to see his father leaning against it, his arms crossed in a cool demeanor. Though he was not smiling, Naruto could tell Minato shared his mother's sentiments. There was nothing to apologize over from his perspective, as he had done what he considered the best for his son and most importantly the village. I knew you would become a greater asset to the village if we spoke up with our concerns to the Mizukage, Minato added from afar. Kushina pulled herself from her son, standing between them. A short glare was sent back at her husband over his callous words. They always disagreed over priorities. His mother was all about family while his father considered the village's safety paramount. He felt himself fall in between, though he usually leaned with his mother in most matters. The village isn't the only important thing around here, Minato. Naruto's feelings matter, too. Her defense of him made Naruto feel better, enough to speak his mind. Thanks, Ka-san. You too-san, Naruto said, his hand on his mother's back to comfort her. It's all a little overwhelming, but I am happy with the opportunity. All the conflict washed away as the parents saw their son's genuine delight. That strength will give you the power to protect the village, definitely, Minato said with a rare smile. Naruto felt Kushina's hand on his shoulder as she gave him a light shake. His mother had a big grin on her face that served to further brighten the mood. That's strength you'll have to protect the family too, ya know. Quote, yeah, believe it. Mother and son shared another close moment. Now come on, we have some shopping to do. The thought of having to shop with his mother brought his mood to a low. What kind of celebration was that? Kushina quickly picked up on his dreary mood and playfully bonked him over the head. Her mock anger quickly disappeared as she grabbed his attention with another smile. We're shopping so I can cook my son's favorite meal, ya know. Quote, Naruto's elation returned with thoughts of his mother's salty pork ramen. It made his mouth water just thinking about it. Not even Minato could resist the idea of eating Kushina's homemade food, his arms uncrossed and another grin appearing. The family of three hurried out of the hospital building to go enjoy themselves. A celebration that could not begin soon enough. In the Mizukage's office, Yugura hosted a fellow Kiri shinobi who sat at one of the nearby couches. On the table between them sat an open folder with the picture of a teenage blonde boy. He was very recognizable as one of the Uzumaki's youngest and brightest. Please look over the documents and inform me if there is some reason why you cannot accept the assignment. If there are no complaints, I'll have you start immediately, Yugura said, pressing his hands together in satisfaction. Yes, sir. But, are you sure it's wise for me to be his teacher? I've never had a genin team before, let alone a single pupil. Quote. The young woman spoke with some hesitation in her voice, but Yugura knew her very well as being confident in her own abilities. It was hard not to be when you were lauded as the most talented Yoden and footing user among all of the Terumi. Mei Terumi, perhaps I should rephrase this, but could you recommend me someone better to teach this boy about your clan's Kekkei Genkei? If so, please do. But, you know as well as I that your talent in ninjutsu is second to none among your peers, even outside of your clan. Quote, Yugura's words should have made her blush, but Mei was more disciplined than that. Still, they gave her more confidence as she sat a bit straighter. Dressed in normal shinobi wardrobe, she wore the village's standard flak jacket with black underclothes. The auburn hair that her clan was prided over drew down to her lower back, braided in a loose herringbone pattern with a small top knot tied with her usual blue band. Mei always carried herself as a competent and attractive kunoichi, and so she did not shy away from enhancing her appearance with Mo-ri aesthetics. Her favorite color blue was used as her nail polish, and her lips were colored dark purple with lipstick. Despite having such confidence over her skills and her body, she still lacked results from her efforts, and so she asked the Mizukage to understand her hesitation. I understand your point, Mizukage-sama. I will look over the files at once. Mei gathered the papers and looked them over once more. 16 years old, Chunin. A pretty standard, if not perfect, track record in missions and performance. He had a considerable pedigree to live up to though, as she flipped to the page with his parents' information. Everyone in the village knew the Uzumaki, but more so, everyone knew the duo that was Minato and Kushina. Known as Kiri no Akai Nami by their enemies, Kushina was the powerful Nine-Tails Jinchuriki and a member of Kiri's barrier team. The Kiri no Kiroi Senko, better known as Minato Namikaze among the villagers, had a devastating amount of kills with his Hiraishin technique and was considered to have cage-level potential. Those were some big shoes Naruto had lived his life to fill. May had no doubt the Mizukage wanted to see him fill them sooner rather than later, too. But, she still hesitated. Was Naruto Uzumaki capable of learning anything from her? She never really considered herself the type that could teach. She was terrible with her cousin's children, after all. Either way, May would find out soon enough. This was a request she knew could not be refused. Then, I will accept this assignment, May said, flipping the folder closed and carefully placing it back on the table. Yugura smiled, though it almost felt sinister with how satisfied he was with her answer. I'm sure you will find a way to handle Naruto's delicate family situation. I've always believed women were the most adaptive teachers. I have confidence in you, May. May stood up from her seat and formally bowed. Whether she liked it or not, he was her superior. An order was an order. Still, she felt sick to her stomach for some reason when she was in his presence. Something never felt right with Yugura. The next day came too quickly for Naruto. He felt light in the head as he walked with Yugura through Karigakure. He still could not believe they were going to personally meet the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist. For some reason, he still felt like he was unworthy of their attention. Yugura seemed to think the opposite as he paid the matter little mind. As they walked together, Yugura had been telling Naruto about the village's 3-tailed beasts and their capabilities. It seemed only Yugura had full control of his chakra, though he had admitted that the beast's relative power and its personality contributed to the Mizukage's ability to contain and control it. Still, just the presence of their Jinchuriki gave the other villages pause to attempt any kind of attack. Even Konoha, which had made many territorial gains in the aftermath of the Third Shinobi War, did not dare to attack Karigakure despite their calls for the 9 tails to be given back to them. Without a tailed beast, Konoha was at a severe disadvantage on the negotiations table. Iwagakure's strategic victory over them during the Third Shinobi War had kept them in check, for the most part, but their Yonda Ime Orochimaru was a considerable threat. Yugura warned Naruto never to trust the man, should they ever meet. Stay away from that man, should you ever meet him, says Yugura. Orochimaru must be an intimidating shinobi for the Mizukage to say that. Of course, Naruto heard the rumors of the Sannin from the mainland and their martial prowess during the Second Shinobi War. But, words were easily twisted, legends were just a few adjectives away from dropouts. Not that he disbelieved the Mizukage, and he would be sure to heed his advice should he ever have need to go to Konoha. Though, he doubted that was even a remote possibility considering Kiri's isolationist policy. We are close to their training grounds. I trust you can find the way from here. Yugura had stopped some distance away from the training area, a forest with an abnormal amount of mist shrouding it from view. Naruto furrowed his brow in confusion and Yugura chuckled. Zabuza-san requested that you be sent alone, so I'm afraid we must part ways. There is little for me to do there anyway, as everything is now in your hands. Yugura shrugged, as if it meant nothing. Naruto's destiny was his to shape, in other words. The Mizukage's presence had offered him some comfort in an unfamiliar area. Still, he was a Kiri shinobi in his own right. He could not have his hand held the entire way. I understand. Naruto bowed. Very good. Ao from the Anbu will also be in attendance. He will want to speak with you regarding the possibility of recruitment into the organization. Please be sure to meet with him. Yugura waved goodbye before turning around to walk back. After a few paces he began to disappear into a fine mist of water and his presence could no longer be felt. Naruto shrugged his shoulders and turned back toward the grounds. They definitely were intimidating, but nothing he could not handle. He proceeded onward, now alone. Along the road, he noticed a puddle near one of the drainage pipes on the road. He found it odd for water to be present considering that, apart from the usual mist, there had been no rain the past days. Well, a puddle definitely was not the oddest sight in Karigakure, so he passed it by all the same. A few more paces forward and he realized his suspicions were correct. Two presences appeared behind him, and before he could make a move, his body was surrounded in shuriken chains. The culprits rounded to show themselves in front of him, and he quickly realized from their hit that they too were Kiri shinobi. Then why were they attacking him? Who the hell are you? Naruto shouted in outrage, though they were not fazed by his harsh words. The two men had cloaks over their body to hide what looked like camouflage fatigues. Both had similar metal gauntlets that the chain was attached to, and it appeared to be their primary weapon. Their faces were concealed by rebreathers, and their hit had horns attached to the metal as some kind of fashion statement. I am Gozu. The taller one spoke first, his voice muffled by the mask. And I am Maizu, said the smaller one. We are the demon brothers. As for you, Uzumaki, you should be more careful wandering the streets alone. Even in our village, you aren't safe when someone wants you dead. Those words made Naruto's blood run cold. Someone wanted him dead. How did that make any kind of sense? Still, to have this conversation at such a disadvantage annoyed him. More than that, the betrayal of fellow Kiri shinobi against one of their own pissed him off even more. They needed to be taught a lesson. Now then, with a sudden jerk, the two tightened their chains in an attempt to rip Naruto into pieces. Unfortunately for them, their captive toppled over into a puddle of water. The brothers were caught off guard only for a moment as they sensed his presence behind them. They returned their chains and spread out to catch Naruto off guard. The blonde adjusted his arm guards to show off the skin beneath. A faint black seal could just barely be made out if one were to look closely. Naruto summoned two weapons, one from each arm, into his hands with a pop of smoke. In each hand he now wielded a single kunai blade. Naruto assumed his defensive stance and readied himself for their next attack. He would not be caught off guard a second time. He would figure out who their employer was, even if he had to beat it out of them. Naruto watched carefully as the brothers broke their chain link and separated. They stood on either side of him, with the river that intersected the training ground at their back. No one else had noticed the brazen daylight attack, as Naruto stood alone against his opponents. That was fine, he figured. He would not have to hold back since there were no bystanders to get in the way. Still, he would need to keep at least one alive to get the information he needed. Maizu, now! Gozu shouted to his younger brother, and both of them ran forward. They held their gauntlets out again and the shuriken chain was released. Held taut, it would bisect Naruto if he remained standing where he did. The two were faster than most, and he knew mobility and surprise were their greatest strengths shown so far. Never use the same trick twice. To their surprise, Naruto dashed forward instead of retreating. With his kunai blade ready, he stabbed through the center of the shuriken chain and impaled the unwieldy weapon into the ground. This forced both brothers to stop in their tracks as they tried to pull it free, to no avail. Naruto disappeared, leaving the blade still impaled into the ground. Both Maizu and Gozu scrambled to try and find him, but they could not sense his presence. The momentum of their offensive had been lost and now Naruto had the advantage. Gozu quickly detached himself from the now useless chain, but his younger brother was not so fast. Before Maizu could even realize what was happening, Naruto had appeared behind him with his other kunai blade ready to strike at his back. Maizu turned to look Naruto in the eyes and was shaken by what he saw. There was no hesitation. He was only an enemy to the blonde Uzumaki. Before he could even scream, the blade pierced his back and forced him to the ground. Blood began to ooze out into a reflective pool of crimson. Brother! Gozu cried out in anguish as Maizu was downed in one hit. This enemy of theirs was more than they had expected. The intelligence they received said he would hesitate against a fellow Kiri shinobi, but his reaction times were even faster than their own. Now that his brother was down, Gozu was at a significant disadvantage as they relied on each other to tag team. Enraged at his brother's defeat, Gozu felt his legs carry him forward. He wanted nothing more than to wipe the smirk off that kid's face. He would not be looked down upon by some brat. From his metal gauntlet, he shot out a few shuriken from the mechanisms inside. Naruto readied his blade with both hands and swung out. The strike knocked away the first projectile, and with a few twists of his wrist he quickly deflected the rest. His body moved as if it was one with the blade, expertly moving in and out of the flight path of all of Gozu's attacks. Frustrated at his inability to hit anything, Gozu barely noticed that Naruto was pointing at him. Only when he heard a familiar sizzle did he realize that he was in danger. With all his strength, he leapt into the air and back toward the river. In the next moment, the place where he was standing exploded with rock and shrapnel launching in all directions. Gozu recovered himself on the river, using chakra to stand atop the moving water. He tried to assess the situation in an effort to calm himself. Naruto remained where he was originally near his brother, and so he had a moment to think. The attack happened right where Naruto's blade was impaled into the ground, and so Gozu quickly connected the dots. Naruto must have planted an explosive tag on his sword prior to using it to impale the chain. Gozu realized his opponent had been thinking considerably ahead in their fight to predict he would run that path, but considering his brother were running parallel to one another, perhaps it was not such a far-off stretch. Still, to come up with that in such a short amount of time was impressive. He would have to change tactics if he wanted to win. His reputation was riding on the line, after all. From inside the training ground, hidden behind the thick mist that the village received its namesake, He 7 ninja swordsmen of Kurigakure watched the battle with some amusement. Since the start of the fight, they had eagerly waited to see just who would come out on top. Naruto's quick thinking and impressive speed had made a few look twice, but for the most part none had been particularly impressed. Yet, Zabuza watched quietly, his eyes focused on the demon brothers. One might even say his face was scrunched up in annoyance if they knew him well enough. Mangetsu and Kisame stood near one another, discussing the recent tactic used by Naruto. It was kind of impressive he knew just where to place the tag. Almost as if he had expected no margin of error, Mangetsu said with a cross look, his eyes focused on analyzing the battle. Kisame was leaning against a nearby tree looking quite pleased with the proceedings. He was rarely one to take things seriously, and he kept relaxed with his arms crossed and a big smirk on his face. But if you look closely, you can see the kid laid down a bunch of explosive tags along his way to Maizu. Even if the sword one failed, he had an insurance policy. Kisame's chipper mood could be translated as a compliment to Naruto's method. Kushimaru, the thin and stocky Anbu of the group, was close enough to overhear them talking. He swung around the trunk of his tree and stood on his side, using chakra to stay attached. You say it like it was something impressive, Kisame. This fight is just a bunch of kids throwing sticks. Some sharp sticks, Kisame pointed at the downed Maizu and snickered. Zabuza ignored them and continued to watch. His eyes shifted focus when the water behind Gozu started to shift. Not bad for a snot-nosed brat. Gozu grabbed a lever that was on his metal gauntlet and pulled it. The bulky piece of metal fell apart, freeing his right hand for use. Time for some payback, kid, Gozu said with a hidden smirk as he began to go through hand signs. Too slow. A voice responded in his ear, and he realized that he was not alone in the river. All around his vision, water surrounded him and encased him in a bubble. Unable to move, he turned to see Naruto holding the water technique with one hand while the other let go of the kunai blade as it disappeared in a puff of smoke. He went back to look at the other Naruto, the one he thought was real, only to see it dissolve into a puddle of water, a water clone. Defeated at his own game, Gozu could only lament the fact he did not see through Naruto's technique sooner. When Naruto had first escaped from their chain attack, he had hidden inside of the water as they did in the puddle. Rather than face them directly, he allowed a clone to take his place. In the end, they were not even able to defeat something had a tenth of the power of the original user. This was embarrassing, no matter how Gozu looked at it. Looks like I've successfully captured you, Naruto said with barely hidden satisfaction. Now, tell me who sent you to attack me. Gozu met his gaze and said nothing but a few choice words. Go to hell. Unfortunately, Naruto was not so amused by his answer and sent his other hand into the water. Afraid he would try and strangle him, Gozu futilely tried to avoid his grasp. Instead, Naruto ripped the rebreathe out from his face mask, which forced him to start holding his breath. It was not long before he began to choke on the water of his prison. Gozu's vision began to blur and he realized he was about to pass out. If that happened, he was as good as dead. Unfortunately, even if he wanted to say something, his mouth was full of water so he could not even ask Naruto to stop. Now then, how about you start talking? Stand down. Naruto heard the booming voice come from behind him and saw Zabuza Momochi, one of the infamous swordsmen, appear at the edge of the mist. With no one else around, he must have given the order. Though Naruto would rather keep his opponent locked up, he had no choice but to let him go. The water surrounding Gozu disappeared and he fell into the water. Unable to control his chakra, he was not able to stay afloat properly and struggled in the water. Naruto ignored him and moved closer to Zabuza. He quickly recognized that the other swordsmen were present as well. They hid their chakra signatures well since he had not recognized their presence. As expected of shinobi from that caliber. If they had been there, why had they not helped him? Somehow, Naruto had a feeling they were not around just by coincidence. Sorry for fighting in your training ground, Momochi-san. I was attacked by these two ninja. Naruto looked over his shoulder and noticed Maizu was missing. Had he already been taken away? I wanted to find out who they were working for, so I had no choice but to attack. Well then, look no farther. I was the one who sent them, kid, Zabuza said, without a hint of remorse. Naruto narrowed his eyes, but said nothing. That seemed to make the most sense, given that most would never know his destination or the time he was supposed to be there. To have Kiri shinobi fight each other to death like that though was really cruel. Without any warning, someone could have really died. With that information in mind, he hoped Maizu would recover. Gozu had finally recovered and approached Zabuza on land. He quickly bowed his head and did his best to look apologetic, though Zabuza's eyes were hardly accommodating. He looked thoroughly disappointed, to put it lightly. I'm very sorry for the failure of my brother and I, Zabuza-sama. If there is, Gozu finally chose to look at his superior in his eyes and sorely wished he had not. A powerful glare was all that was needed as Gozu dismissed himself. The relationship between those two had just soured. Clearly, Zabuza had been expecting a different outcome than what he got. Naruto was not sure how he felt about the Jonin's lack of confidence. I wanted to see your abilities firsthand and how you handled stress. Beating the brothers was to be expected, but I wanted to know just how efficient you could be. Zabuza explained with a harsh gaze. I understand. Naruto had quickly figured out the point of the test, but he was not happy with the end result. He had almost killed a fellow Kiri shinobi for nothing. That did not sit well with him. Zabuza must have picked up on his hesitation and crossed his arms in defiance. The gap between their skill levels was very clear, so in Naruto's position it was hard to argue against the method. You'll be doing a lot worse than fighting comrades on the front. If you can't stomach it, then you best leave now. Zabuza turned his back to Naruto and started to head back into the mist. Naruto saw his opportunity to join the organization shrinking with every step. He stepped forward, arm out in a motion to make him stop. That's not what I. Naruto stopped when he saw the rest of the swordsmen emerge from the mist. Kisame was the first to address him, smiling as usual. You know, kid, to sign up you have to know more than just how to use a sword. You have to be flexible enough to kill just about anyone you come across. His words lacked the warmth his facial expression provided. You may have defeated both your opponents, however, you sacrificed one of your blades. As a member of the swordsmen, that is not an option you have. Each blade is precious and irreplaceable to the village, Mangetsu added his own words of wisdom. Naruto reflected on their words and knew there was truth behind what they said. To be considered for the swordsman, he could not rely completely on his sword, nor could he be willing to sacrifice it so easily. He wondered if that had completely soured his chance of impressing them. With all that said, Zabuza continued after a short pause, "You aren't a member of our group, nor are you a trainee. You can't be expected to follow those rules." The scrutiny they had offered him lightened somewhat with those words. "Your actions were acceptable for a life or death situation, so you passed the test." Zabuza shrugged his shoulders in disinterest. "Not that it really mattered. It just proved you were competent as a shinobi." All the same, Naruto was glad he was able to get through without any further incident. Mangetsu. Suigetsu. The two brothers stepped forward, the younger one arriving from behind the mist. "You two will guide him while he's here. Make sure he doesn't get in the way." Zabuza turned around and headed back in without any further niceties, and the rest of the swordsmen did the same. Suigetsu approached Naruto and greeted him with a lazy salute. Naruto returned the gesture with a solid nod. Despite their occasional rivalries, they were pretty close to one another. To see a familiar face was reassuring, and as a trainee Suigetsu had already proven himself to be pretty dependable, that went double for his brother. "Come on, Naruto. We'll show you around, bro." Suigetsu called out to his solemn brother, who simply nodded and beckoned them to follow. "You can even meet good old Chojuro. I bet he'll love to meet you, probably at least." Quote. Naruto did not get the joke Suigetsu was cackling over, but he did his best to smile. His friend from the Hazuka was not the easiest person to understand. His humor was known to get a little dark from time to time. There was no one better to guide him through the process, he supposed. After all, Suigetsu joined only a little after his older brother Mangetsu did. Regardless of what you had to say about him, Suigetsu's skill never came into question. Together, they disappeared into the mist. Atop a nearby building, two figures watched as the preceding battle and conversation wrapped up between the swordsman and their prospective recruit. One of them was a village Jonin intently observing her newest charge. The other, an acquaintance from the Hunter Nin Corps, sent to speak with the very same boy. "Not bad for some new blood Chunin. His caution is something I can respect," Ao said, reflecting on Naruto's expert use of substitution and clone techniques. Quote. His compatriot remained silent, stuck in a somber mood. May had her arms crossed as her emerald eye remained locked on the now quiet battlefield below. Ao frowned as he had hoped to have some kind of conversation with her before he had to meet Naruto. Unfortunately, she had not uttered a word to him since she arrived from following the Uzumaki kid from the Mizukage's office. It was obvious she was trying to gather intelligence on him, but for what he had no idea. "Given his show, I'd say you don't have much to worry about. If he has that kind of potential, he should be a good student." Ao spoke from his own experience with his superior, Tsurugi. Seeing that kind of potential was something you could get good at, given enough time. A veteran of the Third Shinobi World War, Ao had seen just about everything he could care to in life. To find a decisive, cool shinobi like Naruto get into such a position like the Seven Swordsmen bode well for the village's future. He was sure Minato, the boy's father, felt the same way. Despite Ao's words, Mei refused to budge. Her dubious frown only seemed to deepen. She was trying to come up with some excuse, some hidden problem the blonde had to justify her worry. Unfortunately for Mei, she would have to learn on her own that such secrets could only be found out by talking face to face with the man of the hour. "Well," outside, bending his back a bit to stretch. "It's about time I go introduce myself to him. If I notice anything, I'll let you know." He offered one last look of sympathy to the embattled Jonin. Then, he was gone in a blur, leaving Mei alone with her troubled thoughts. And that is the Nuibari, wielded by Kushimaru Kuriare. It is a thin needle sword that complements the speed of the user in order to make pinpoint, piercing strikes through opponents. Mangetsu explained to Naruto as they stood off to the side of the swordsman as they trained, either in sparring achas together or off alone. They were watching Kushimaru train, a tall lanky man with a mane of light hair, tempered by his Anbu mask that hid away his identity. He was fighting against Jinpachi, reinforcing the fact the two were often seen together. Due to the sordid acts they committed during their shinobi career, they were known as the Heartless Pair. With the thread embedded inside, he strings his opponents up so they can't move. From what I hear, it's pretty painful, just the way he likes to leave them. Kind of disgusting, might as well just kill them, right? Suigetsu added, shaking his head at the ANBU's choice method of killing. Naruto definitely did not like the sound of that, but no one could deny Kushimaru's effectiveness on the battlefield. There was a reason why he still had a sword in his hand and the village's symbol on his mask, rather than be stuck in some jail. Still, Naruto wished the village did not have to rely on men that felt the way he did about killing and death. It was almost as if he was not human. Enough of that crap. Bro, let's get Cho and show off your sword, Haramakare, Suigetsu said in a not-so-subtle way to change the subject. Very well. His brother, as always, kept a civil air about him as he waved Chojuro over. The boy in question, a short Kiri shinobi with turquoise hair and a pair of glasses, came running. In his zeal, he almost tripped over himself a few times. But still, Naruto could see that he was very satisfied to be acknowledged. When he ran up to them, he and Mangetsu shared a friendly glance. Yes, senpai, I've arrived, Chojuro said with a bit of pride, standing as straight as he could. Chojuro, we were just about to go over the Haramakare's function with Naruto. Perhaps you should be the one to explain it instead, Mangetsu said as he summoned a scroll and unfurled it. Inside, Naruto could see labels for 7 different swords. He quickly figured out that the scroll was where the swords were kept when not in use by their respective owners. Suigetsu had mentioned his brother was known as the master of the armory in the swordsman, which was apparently a coveted position because it meant that user was responsible for each weapon and in turn, could wield any of them should it be necessary. Mangetsu summoned his own sword with a quick application of chakra. A large puff of smoke hid the broadsword's sudden arrival. Wrapped in bandages, Mangetsu held the large blade with both hands as it so happened to have 2 hilts. Despite its obvious weight, Mangetsu did not look dispirited and easily threw the blade around a bit to warm himself up. Of course, senpai. I can probably manage that much, probably, the trainee whispered the last part, but everyone could easily hear it. Chojuro clearly had some issues with confidence. Anyway, the Haramakare is a blade that is capable of storing a large amount of chakra to be used in a form of shape manipulation. There are 2 large holes at the top of the blade where the chakra is released to form a shape around the blade, which is generally used to enhance the hitting power of any attack. Despite his uneasy nature, Chojuro very passionately recounted what he had learned with Naruto and Suigetsu. Mangetsu meanwhile prepared a quick demonstration. With a wide stance, he held the blade in front of himself and allowed a quick release in chakra that quickly formed the shape of a long sickle. With a single wide swing, the chakra blade went out and brought down the closest target dummies with a clean strike to their center mass. Naruto stood in silent amazement, along with Chojuro. Suigetsu just rolled his eyes and smiled. That was his brother, all right. As you can see, the speed at which these weapons form from the chakra is quite fast. They are also used to extend the user's range well past that of a normal blade. Much of the technique relies on the user, however, so it really goes to show how much Mangetsu senpai practices. That much was obvious. His expertise with such a heavy sword, as well as the obvious chakra requirements it offered, was impressive to say the least. Mangetsu returned to them and sheathed the sword on his back. He remained as taciturn as ever, not reacting to their silent praise. Eventually, Naruto could not help but ask what had been on his mind since he arrived. Among these people, he figured he could trust they would not berate or laugh at him. So, Mangetsu-san, if I was requested to be here, does that mean I will receive permission to train with you? As much as it was rewarding to watch such powerful shinobi train, there was only so much he could learn from standing around. Besides, he came here because he wanted to become like them. He wanted to one day have the kind of power Mangetsu had displayed, so that he could protect the village and his family. If he was not going to become one of the 7 swordsmen, then being there was a waste of time. That is something that is up to each swordsman on a personal level, whether or not they want to talk to you or not. As you can see, training here is pointless unless you are offered time with the blade you are one day meant to wield. Quote, as Mangetsu said that, he took his broadsword and offered one hilt to Chojuro. After a moment of hesitation, the younger boy realized it was finally his turn and took the weapon in his own hands. Bowing in thanks, Chojuro took a bit of time to steady his grip before he made his way to a more secluded corner of the training area. Maybe he was still a little embarrassed he did not have the strength to hold the haramakiri properly yet. But to even be able to pick it up with his size and physique was impressive, to say the least. Not even Suigetsu had any words to make fun of him. I see, Naruto said after he watched Chojuro walk off. He could not help but deflate a bit of his excitement after hearing that. Don't worry about it, Naruto. Amayuri has been staring at you since you first got here, so you should go talk to her. Naruto heard Suigetsu's undeniably cheeky tone and looked over his shoulder toward the training ground. There, in the middle of the field, Amayuri Ringo stood waiting. A sharky smirk began to form on her lips when she noticed that his attention had drifted toward her. She was on the short side, even smaller than Chojuro, but she had a much more aggressive presence than he did. Even from this distance, he could feel her chakra release in what he could only guess was excitement. The long red hair might fool someone into thinking she was a member of the Uzumaki, but he had never met anyone who would acknowledge her as being related to them. The baggy, pinstriped clothes made it very clear she was not a girl who favored fashion or desired to be attractive to the opposite. She was very intimidating and not particularly welcoming, but Naruto could already tell he could not escape her wanting gaze. Well, I guess I better go and see what she wants, Naruto said, his nervous tone revealed his inner thoughts. As he walked off, he could almost feel Suigetsu's eyes bore into the back of his head. He definitely knew more than he was letting on, but there was not much Naruto could do. Finally decided to join me, huh? She called out as he approached, that toothy smile not going away. I figured you had something you wanted to say. Naruto stopped a considerable distance from her, just enough so they could talk. Amayuri rolled her weight around the heels of her feet, fingers clenched around her 2 double-edged blades. From what Mangetsu had said, they were known to be the sharpest weapons in all of the world. She could imbue them with lightning in a moment's notice, which basically offered her the ability to use Raiden techniques without any training or hand seals. That's right. You made quite a splash with that fight before, but I want to see just how long you can last against a real opponent. She spread her feet out into a ready stance and looked ready for a fight. Naruto quickly realized she was not playing around and summoned his remaining kunai blade. He decided to wield it with both hands, since he knew it would take all of his strength just to hold back one sword of hers. With his weapon out, he had finally amused Amayuri to the point where she was practically jumping up and down in excitement. Don't go running away now. And if you give up, I might really fry you. Her warnings did not sit well with him, but running was the last thing on his mind. If he ran away, what kind of shinobi would that make him? Just like with the demon brothers, he would face her down as if it were a fight to the death. Without a moment's notice, she leapt forward with her blades already gathering electricity. Given her small size, he had not anticipated she would be so fast. Naruto barely had enough time to bring his sword up to bear when her 2 fangs hit him with full force. Gah! Naruto felt the lightning course through his body and struggled to hold himself together. Amayuri licked her lips and gave him one last push, forcing him down onto his back. She held one of her blades to his throat in a mock attempt to get his surrender. Naruto forced his body to listen to his commands, as the lightning messed with his nerve control. With a single strike, he lazily batted her sword away and forced himself back onto his feet. That was just one strike and he could barely feel his extremities. There was no question why she was considered so frightening. But he would not give up so easily. Suigetsu watched from afar as Naruto and Ringo met again, their swords clacking against one another. He could only whistle in awe as the blonde was sent flying again. There was credit to be given when Naruto chose to stand up again. Ringo-chan loves to beat up the newbies, right bro? Suigetsu remembered his own time in the ring with her. He could barely last a minute before he had to give up. For a man made of water, her lightning attacks were super effective. If he can hold out for a few more minutes, he'll earn Amayuri's respect. That will go a long way in cementing his place here. Mangetsu, as always, offered the truth of what lied beneath the spectacle. Well, I suppose that's enough. I've beaten you up enough for one day. Ringo reluctantly sheathed her swords as she watched Naruto lay motionless on the ground. The remnants of his blade were impaled into the ground some distance away, in one of the many craters they had created in their endurance match. After 5 minutes, the poor boy had finally collapsed from her strength. Still, Ringo was more than satisfied as she ended the training with a smile on her face. He never gave up or tried to run. That was what counted, in her book. You know, Amayuri grunted as she pulled his arm over her shoulder. Guys like you who don't run away are really my type. Naruto's glazed eyes could barely focus on her, but his ears still worked somehow. After a few unsteady steps forward, he started to smile. It grew wider and wider as he felt like he had won, somehow. Thanks, Ringo-san. Don't thank me yet. The next time you train with me, I might just eat you alive. Quote. They shared a hearty laugh as she carried him back over the Hazuka brothers. Suigetsu could only watch with a gaping maw, stunned by the events that he had observed. Never before had he seen someone last so long against Amayuri, save for the other swordsman. Not to mention Naruto actually got her to laugh. He had been trying to do that for years. Even Mangetsu offered a bit of a smile to the returning champion. After he spent some time resting under the shade of a tree, Naruto was requisitioned by the newly arrived Ao. He said that he was sent by the Mizukage to speak with him about the Anbu, and so Naruto did as was requested of him and heard what the man had to say. Really, it was a short conversation. While Naruto knew little about the organization, aside from rumors and what they were told in school, there was little else Ao needed to describe about them. They took on the jobs other shinobi could not, and acted directly on the Mizukage's orders. They were held to a high standard, with rank and clan ceasing to matter upon induction. The fact that his personal time would be severely curtailed, and that he could no longer actively support his clan in politics were facts that worried Naruto. The time he got to spend with his mother and father was precious. He also cared for the Uzumaki, and desired to continue to grow the clan's fame in the village by performing his duties. I know it's a tough decision, so I'll leave you to it. The best advice I can offer is to go with your gut and stick to it. Ao offered him another smile as he turned to leave. Either way, the village has a shinobi it can count on. Ao was clearly a man of few words. The way he spoke and moved displayed that he was always filled with some purpose, and he had a great sense of pride in the organization and the village he belonged to. Naruto envied that maturity, but he wondered if he could get the same if he chose to follow the traditional path of promotion in the regular forces. Perhaps his mother and father could give him a better perspective. Yo, Naruto. He turned to see Suigetsu running toward him. What's up, Suigetsu? Naruto figured they would still be training, considering how early it was in the day. It was rare for Suigetsu to get much free time when the swordsmen were back from the many missions they carried out. Zabuza-san just dismissed us for some last-minute mission. Looks like you and I are free, since trainees aren't allowed to go on anything A rank or above. Suigetsu did not hide his disappointment very well, but there was always next time. Alright, let's go get something to eat. I'm starving, Naruto suggested, as if on cue with a stomach rumble. Suigetsu chuckled and led the way forward. Even he could use a snack after a hard day's work. The usual place, right? The Hazuka brother asked. Of course. Naruto smiled, glad to know the restaurant had finally become the usual for him and his friends. Maybe they could meet the others there as well. It had been a while since they had all eaten together. In a crowded marketplace, two members of the Uzumaki clan ate to their heart's content. They sat on a wooden bench, near to where the small restaurant had served them their meals. They could eat inside, but they always preferred to enjoy the fresh air. Right now, the two were eating at two very distinct paces. One was calm and methodical, whereas the other one ate as if they had not been given a bite to eat in days. You should slow down, Karen. Otherwise, you may. Don't say another word, Nagato. Otherwise, my next punch won't be something you can heal, I'll send you right to Fuso Oba-san. Nagato hid behind his long bangs of hair in an attempt to escape Karen's wrath. She always used her absurd anger to get him to shut up. If only Naruto and Suigetsu were around, she would have someone else to vent on. He knew she was eating her favorite okonomiyaki pancakes, but shoveling them into her mouth was not exactly the most flattering thing to do. I don't need to listen to your advice on how to eat my food. She loudly grumbled between bites. Karen had been gone from the village for many weeks now. She had missed this flavor and texture of their favorite place to eat. Nagato could not complain either, as he was eating his usual favorite, fist stew, with just as much enthusiasm. Nagato noticed two familiar faces in the crowd and waved them over. While Karen was too engrossed in her meal to notice them, Nagato indicated they sit on the opposite side of the bench. BLE. He was glad to see the other two as the group of companions was now complete. Naruto, Suigetsu. Good to see you. Nagato greeted them warmly, a nice contrast to his usual bashfulness. Karen practically choked when she heard her crush's name. The half-eaten bread in her hand was quickly set down as she tried to recover her feminine wiles. With a quick adjustment of her glasses, she saw Naruto had chosen to sit opposite of Nagato with the more than disgusting Suigetsu now across from her. She gave the water boy one of her usual glares and quickly turned her attention to Naruto. She could only melt at his tender smile he offered to Nagato, and her by extension. Suigetsu, noticing this, garnered a daring smirk. Ah, isn't that just so? See you. The table rumbled as Suigetsu was swiftly kicked in the shins. Ouch. Damn it. Woman. Suigetsu nursed his wounds while Karen directed her rising anger back at him. Shut the hell up. With that last outburst, she quickly grew a hearty grin for Naruto. Welcome back, Naruto-kun. How was your training? Naruto had quickly gotten used to these exchanges between Karen and Suigetsu, so he did not skip a beat in explaining his battle against the demon brothers and his introduction to the Seven Swordsmen. Nagato and Karen listened with genuine interest, while the miffed Suigetsu looked off into the sky with cheek in hand. And then, Amayuri-san said I could train with her again next time. Naruto finished his story quickly, as he did not want to come off as a braggart. He knew that Suigetsu was still a bit disappointed at how fast he had been able to win over the older girl. Oh, I bet Ringo-san is a really nice person to help you out, Karen said with a sickeningly sweet smile. That Naruto knew all too well from his mother. She was plotting something behind those red eyes. The Ringo subject was now off the table, if he cared any for his life. Now that you mention your training, Naruto, it sounds like you didn't get much chance to rest. Let me take a look. Nagato got up from his seat and rounded the table, his hand already glowing green with healing chakra. Ah no, that really isn't necessary. Naruto shook his hand in an effort to wave him away, but to no avail. Come on and let me take a look. My mother taught me some more this past weekend, so I should be able to take care of it. Sometimes it felt like Nagato was overly sensitive to their well-being, but in the end he was just being a good friend. With his mother and father both acting as doctors in the village, he had a penchant for helping people. He really wanted to be a medical shinobi and it was his dream to one day be able to save anyone from death. So, Naruto did not feel bad when he allowed Nagato to examine him and heal some scratches, since he knew how much it meant to his dear friend. Karen stumbled out of her seat and ran around to join Nagato. She rolled her sleeve up and offered it to Naruto. If it's healing, then I should be the one to. Karen. Naruto's uncharacteristically harsh tone made her jump a bit with an eek. It even managed to snap Suigetsu from his daydream. I told you already to not offer that kind of healing to just anybody. It's very valuable to our clan and I know the chakra expense is tough on you, so only use it when you really have to. But, Karen struggled to come up with an excuse, but she could not get past Naruto's demanding eyes. When he made that kind of request of her, she could not refuse. Right. Sorry. As Karen started to slide her sleeve back down, her excitement had quickly turned sour. She perked up when Naruto's hand suddenly took hold of her wrist, forcing her to pause. When her eyes met his, Karen noticed him smiling. An attempt to return their mood back to a happier one, no doubt. I'm sorry, Karen-chan. You know I only say that. You only say that, because you care. I know, Naruto-kun. Karen felt comfortable enough to smile, and her shoulders sagged in relief. That was the Naruto she had fallen in love with. As cute as you two are, maybe I can. Suigetsu was shut up as Karen's free arm was sent flying into his face. All the while, she kept smiling and enjoying the moment with the now thoroughly uncomfortable Naruto. She had hit Suigetsu so hard his face had melted again. Definitely, Uzumaki women were not to be trifled with. After everyone had settled down, Naruto and Suigetsu had finally gotten their own meals. Everyone was enjoying themselves with some light-hearted banter. Even Suigetsu and Karen had reached the point they could talk to one another without immediately escalating into a fight. These were the times Naruto cherished most with his friends and family, and he only wished his mother and father could join him. Speaking of his mother, Naruto could feel her chakra approaching them. He was never much of a practiced sensor shinobi, but with Karen's advice and his mother's status as a Jinchuriki, her chakra was easy enough to discern in a crowd. Karen too had perked up upon sensing someone familiar. Naruto looked over his shoulder and saw his mother running down the street in her battle uniform. Alongside her was another Uzumaki from the Kiri barrier team, Hanoka-san if he remembered correctly. His mother often talked about her, cute little Kohai, from the barrier team, although as he understood it their ages were not so drastically different. He could tell they were on duty because on their sleeves they had the white barrier insignia of the interception team. With a drawn-out wave, he tried to get his mother's attention. He was in luck when he noticed the corner of one her eyes shift toward him, and she slowed down for a quick chat. Hey, Naruto-kun, Karen-chan, Suigetsu, and Nagato-chan too. As always, his mother was full of energy as she made her way over to them. Welcome, Kushina-sama. Karen quickly got up from her seat and bowed. Nice to see you, Kushina Oba-sama, Nagato said, referring to Kushina as his honored aunt. Yo, Kushina. Suigetsu embodied the term, laid back, in his greeting. Luckily, his mother had gotten used to it. You all look like you are having a fun time. It has been a while since you've all been in the village together, right? Kushina crossed her arms with a knowing smile. It was not hard to see that they had truly been eating out and enjoying themselves. The table with one quick survey was made of a mess of empty plates. Conversation was the greatest appetite soother. Yeah, we were just talking about what we had been up to the past few days. Naruto paused. Ka-chan, where are you off to so fast? He was much more interested in her mission than reminiscing. Kushina's smile faltered when she remembered her duties. She uncrossed her arms and stood a little straighter, taking on the stance of a battle-ready kunoichi. We detected a group of intruders outside of the village, along the main road. Quickly, the younger shinobi grasped the seriousness of the situation. They haven't moved for a while, so we have been sent to ascertain their identities and stop them, if necessary. Quote, "Are they dangerous?" Nagato asked quietly, all of his energy from the previous conversation gone. Could be. We won't know until we get there. Kushina looked at Hinoka, who had remained dutifully quiet up to that point. The young compatriot leaned toward Kushina, hand to her mouth to muffle her words. Kushina-senpai, we should go, Hinoka whispered, not wanting to be rude. Kushina had indulged a bit by stopping to talk, but the fact of the matter was they were on a tight schedule. Let me go with you, Naruto suggested. It wouldn't feel right to let you go with just the two of you. If it gets dangerous, I want to be there. Naruto-kun, you don't have to. Kushina appreciated her son's words, but she tried to dissuade him all the same. No, I want to go. Naruto respectfully stopped her from denying him. Remember what you said, Ka-chan, family is the most important thing. I would just worry if I let you go now. Kushina knew better than to try and stop him. If he really wanted to go, he would just follow behind her. He really was like his father, and like her too, she supposed. Well, she would just have to protect him then. Alright, Naruto, you can come with me, but we need to go. Kushina noted with Hinoka's silent insistence. I'll come too. Suigetsu offered with a toothy smirk. I can't have you going off to look cool on your own. Naruto chuckled and accepted that Suigetsu was not one to be outdone. Then, I'll be coming too. Nagato stepped forward to join the other boys. Despite his kind heart, even he could gain confidence when he was around Naruto and the others. Well then, I guess I have no choice but to come along as well. You might need someone from the Cipher Division, after all. Karen found her own excuse to join, even if it was just to be close to Naruto. Kushina could not help but laugh at just how close they were as friends. It made her happy to see her son come so far, so quickly. He really was becoming a great shinobi by having partners like that at his side. Okay everyone, follow me. We can't wait any longer. Kushina started to run down the street at a considerable speed, and Naruto and the others quickly fell in. To step behind her. The village passed them by in a blur of motion. They received a few concerned looks from villagers, but otherwise were left uninterrupted. It was not long before they were in front of the village gate. There, they noticed someone leaning up against the stone wall. Another shinobi waiting to join them. Kushina-sama. Everyone stopped as the young woman addressed Kushina respectfully. Naruto was immediately blown away by her beauty. Long auburn hair, dark nail polish, piercing eyes. This woman screamed mature to him, and he found it difficult to meet her gaze. Was it only in his mind, or was she looking his way too? Mei-san, I didn't expect to see you here. Kushina greeted the other woman warmly. I know you are in a rush, but I'd like to request permission to join you. Such requests were growing more and more common, and Kushina really could not find a reason to say no. Besides, she had a sneaking suspicion of the real reason why Mei wanted to come along. Of course, having someone like you around would definitely put me at ease. Thank you very much. Mei bowed in thanks and fell into step with the rest of the group. Her eyes wandered over all of them until they met Naruto's. When he tried to look away, she sent him an alluring glance. She had always loved to tease younger men. Together, the large group of Kiri shinobi set out to investigate the disturbance. With Kushina in the lead, the group separated from the main road and started to move through the surrounding forest and underbrush. She did not want them to arrive in a conspicuous manner, for their own safety, and so everyone quietly followed along. The mist had thinned somewhat since they left the village, but it still offered considerable protection to hide their movements. It should be just up ahead, Kushina whispered to Hinoka and Mei, who remained the closest to her. The other four were still able to hear, and the excitement and fear of what could be around the corner started to bubble up within them. Would it be enemy shinobi? Or would it be another false alarm? No villages were technically at war with Kiri at the moment, but that had never stopped skirmishes fr. Breaking out in the blink of an eye. Then, Kushina held up a hand for everyone to stop. She signaled for everyone to come forward to where she was. Together, they all looked onto the main road from the cover of the bushes to see a large group of cloaked figures on the road. A few of them were kneeling down and placing some sort of tags or seals on the ground. The rest were standing guard on either side of the road and in the trees. They were definitely shinobi, but it was impossible to make out their affiliation or identity with those black cloaks. Explosive tags. Hinoka identified the suspicious items in question almost immediately. That quickly escalated a few suspicious figures to a clear act of sabotage from another village. But why do something like that? Civilians traveled on the road just as much, if not more so than shinobi. They were innocents that would be hurt. The cold logic of the enemy's plan was difficult for Naruto to swallow, but he knew there were no rules in war. All the more reason, he figured, that they would have to stop them before they could get away. We can't let them get away with this without at least identifying what village they hail from, Kushina said, biting her lip as she struggled to think. There are more of them, but if we work together we could. Naruto's recommendation was dropped by his mother almost immediately. Her harsh glare was a very rare sight, but he knew she did not use it lightly. No, you four will stay back until we know just how strong these guys are. But, if you go alone. Naruto knew his mother always put him first, but this was too reckless. Kushina just smiled. As always, Naruto was thinking ahead. Unfortunately, her mind had already been made up the second Naruto and his friends joined the group. It's the parents' job to protect her children, ya know. That closed off any kind of discussion between her and the younger ones. Together with Hinoka and Mei, his mother discussed their plan to confront the enemy and get them to reveal their identities. But, Naruto still felt it was too risky for his mother and Hinoka to go without any kind of backup. Karen, Naruto turned to his cousin with fire in his eyes. Follow me. I need your help with something. With that kind of look, how could she refuse? Suigetsu barely held back a sigh as Nagato watched on, concerned as ever. He hoped Naruto was making the right decision defying Kushina. She was definitely not one to go against. When Kushina turned back, she noticed Naruto and Karen were gone. Considering how headstrong he was, she was not surprised to see him go off on his own. But, if he was not careful then he could endanger the rest of them. She would just have to make sure her plan succeeded. Kushina and Hinoka appeared in front of the suspicious saboteurs without warning. The ones closest leapt back into the relative safety of the group's formation. While some reached beneath their robes for weapons, most of the others just stood still like statues. As they had counted before, there were a dozen on the road. If they had any skilled sensor shinobi, they might have been able to hide a few more in the trees. Kushina was no pushover, but the people in front of her were completely unknown in their skill sets. A certain level of caution had to be considered, along with the risk of a direct confrontation. Identify yourselves. You are trespassing in the jurisdiction of Kurigakure, Hinoka said with more than a hint of intimidation. That's the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, no doubt about it. The other one is the Uzumaki subordinate. One of the men in the lead quickly identified them. Kushina fought to avoid betraying her shock that they had such intelligence on them both. She had never left the village before as the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, so how could they know what she looked like? Had they already infiltrated the village? This changed the situation drastically as Kushina went to grab something from her equipment pouch. Hinoka as well realized the danger and spread her legs in a ready stance. So, it really is them. Perfect. Another one of the shinobi made a quick hand signal and at their flanks, something fluttered in the bush. Before Kushina could even ready a kunai, she found herself unable to move. The enemy pointed at her feet, and she looked to see a foreign shadow had attached itself to her own. This technique, it can't be. From the bushes emerged two more shinobi, both holding their hands in the rat seal. Each move the users made, Kushina and Hinoka were forced to mimic. Now that they had been successfully captured, the rest of the figures finally shed their hoods. Underneath, they quickly revealed themselves to be hiding behind animal masks. Kushina knew now just how bad the situation was. Konoha had sent this Anbu squad to the village not to sabotage, but to kidnap her. No matter how strong you are, I'm afraid you won't break the Nara's shadow imitations so easily. The so-called leader, the one that had spoken the most, gloated over their weakness behind his bird mask. As for the rest of you, we know you are out there. Come out, otherwise I can't assure the safety of these women. He shouted the order into the trees, to where the others were. They definitely had talented sensor shinobi if they could detect them so easily. While it was almost impossible for a shinobi to easily mask their chakra, she knew that they had hidden themselves rather well before coming out. Mei and the others, however, refused to show themselves. The leader then gave a signal to the Nara, who forced Kushina and Hinoka to grab kunai from their own pouches and hold it to their throats. I won't ask you again. The fact of the matter is, whether we take them alive or dead, we still deny Kurigakure a valuable weapon. So, their lives are in your hands. After a tense pause, Mei emerged from the bushes first. Considering the situation, she looked surprisingly calm. Following after her were Suigetsu and Nagato, both of whom were clearly overwhelmed by this twist. Kushina waited and waited for Naruto to come out, but he never did. What was he planning? Surely they knew that he and Karen were still. Alright, the rules are simple. Don't follow us, otherwise these women will be killed. They must have not been able to sense Naruto or Karen for some reason. Now that she thought about it, neither could she. Kurama's power, while mostly out of her reach, did offer her some limited enhancement of her senses. She had always been skilled enough to pick her son and husband out of the crowd, but even now, it was as if he had disappeared. Given the intricacies of her seal, she could not call on Kurama's chakra even if she wanted to. Considering the beast's immense strength, if she were to indulge it only once and allow the seal to weaken, all would be lost. To lose control here would harm the village, so she had to come up with something else. Kiri's Anbu was never too far behind her when she was sent outside of the village, but given the enemy's level of intelligence on her, they might have foreseen the response time and adjusted accordingly. The others would not be able to pursue either, with their lives as captives being threatened. Kushina might have needed her son after all. Thanks for listening to me, Karen. If you hadn't come along, we would have been caught like the others, Naruto whispered behind him as Karen had her hand on his shoulder. Both of them were hiding in the bushes farther down the road from the enemy. When Naruto realized his mother was not going to let them help her confront the enemy, he knew he had to get ready for the worst-case scenario. So, he decided to have Karen come along and help by using her ability to hide their chakra from the enemy sensor shinobi. There was always the chance that they were still suspicious about the exact number of Kiri shinobi, but Naruto was willing to bet that after they thought they got their prize, He would give up trying to actively search for them. Considering they were still alive, that must have been the case. Naruto-kun, we may be able to hide, but we're still completely outnumbered. Tell me you have a plan. Karen was desperately trying to see the bright side of his idea, but she was starting to panic. Naruto wanted to try and comfort her, but even he knew there was no guarantee they would succeed. The enemies they were facing were some of the best the enemy had to offer. No doubt, they had been training constantly to capture his mother and Jinchuriki like her, so he had to face the facts, he could not beat them on his own. But, if he could just get his mother free, then they could work together to launch a counterattack. There is no way I'm going to let them take my mother. Just try and trust me, Karen. The strength behind Naruto's voice comforted her, at least a little bit. Karen sighed, he only ever dropped the honorific when he was being serious. There was no talking any kind of logic to him now, so she just accepted she was along for the ride. When I start my attack, I want you to grab Hinoka and run back to Mei-san and the others. I'll save my mother and take care of the rest. Quote, if he let Karen leave first, she would be the first one back to relative safety. Besides, he figured their priority was keeping his mother and not Hinoka. But, you can't fight all of these guys on your own. Quote, I know, and I don't plan on it. If I can keep them distracted for a few seconds, I should be able to get a good head start behind you. It was not the best plan he ever created, but it was something. Without any reinforcements, they would just have to make do. If the parent's duty is to protect their children from danger, it's up to the children to save the parent when they get into trouble. Naruto started to gather his chakra as he watched the first few Anbu travel by. He would wait until the very last of them passed, with his mother and Hinoka. Then, he would give them a proper welcoming gift from the village hidden in the mist. Okay, that should be far enough. The leader of the Anbu squad ordered the group to halt. He walked up to Kushina, who could only offer him a glare in retaliation. This only served to amuse him as he looked between his captives with what could only be satisfaction. All right, ladies, time to seal your chakra for the ride. I can't have you getting in the way before we arrive on the mainland. Kushina was powerless to stop his approach with the sealing technique. When he was just a hair's breadth away, a golden chain shot out from Kushina's chest and impaled him clean through. His masked eyes looked down at the mortal wound, then slowly back up at the smiling Kushina, before his body began to collapse. Kushina grunted as the Nara's shadow tightened around her, but she made no move to pull the chain back. She just laughed at the twitching body at her feet, disturbing the surrounding shinobi. That'll teach you to underestimate an Uzumaki, ya know. Despite her temporary surge of power, she struggled against the Nara as they fought to get her under control again. Bind her. Seal her chakra now. 3 more Anbu approached with equipment to hold her. They took their time getting close, as if she were some animal baring her fangs. Hinoka was not strong enough to resist as Kushina could. She could only watch as others approached her to do the same. Sweden. Daibikufu. From the edge of the road, hidden behind the mist, came a powerful wave of water the size of the tallest tree. The Anbu were taken by complete surprise, as they had not sensed anyone near them since they left Mayan. The others. Most of them were able to leap away, but a few were taken in by the water and swept along underneath the current. The Nara, unable to move lest they lose control of the captives, did their best to steady themselves by focusing chakra on their feet. The Anbu that were preparing to bind the women fell back and entered into a diamond formation with their katana ready. Together, they looked back and forth to try and find the source of the attack. Naruto. Kushina called out to her son, she just knew it had to be him. The blonde in question rode the water wave down toward the Nara. He moved as if he were skiing atop the surface, at a speed that made it difficult for the enemy shinobi to keep up. With little more than a sharp turn, he bypassed the Anbu.